Welcome back to Thriving in Business and Life. This is Will Wilkinson.
And this is Christopher Harding. And we're going to actually do the topic today on something that is often heard on a movie set.
Action!
Action, that's right. So we've talked in the past few weeks about, the power of responsibility and what happens when we see ourselves as being fully responsible for our choices and their ripple effect. We've talked about empowerment and how it's a real choice that we make to tap into our full capability. We dove into commitment, and last week we were talking about trust, that it's really a way to look at it would be to say, what can I trust this person to do or not do, rather than are they trustworthy or not?
Well, your film set analogy is pretty appropriate because both you and I have been on film sets, and we know that there's a whole lot of preparation that happens before the director shouts action.
Let's hope.
However, if action is never uttered, absolutely nothing happens.
Yeah.
All the preparation goes for naught. So that's why I feel it's very appropriate to use that reference, because we've prepared, and you just listed off what we've talked about in the last few podcasts. And likewise, unless we get to action, none of it really amounts to much.
Well, and that's a great point. I know for ourselves, I know I've had times in my life when I get stuck in a conundrum.
Yeah,
right,
a loop.
It can be in spin cycle for a while.
Right.
We see this with clients as well, that a lot of times we're trying to solve the problem purely through a thought experiment rather than actually experimenting in real life. And one of the things that we've talked about before is the whole lean management approach. Right. And one of the things about lean, in a way, is that it's an ongoing experiment.
Yeah.
You're trying things out.
Right. I recall that in that system, every business is considered a learning business.
Right.
Regardless of the product or the service, the idea is to constantly be learning and improving your products, your services.
Well, we've both been in situations working with either our own projects in development or clients' projects in development, and a lot of times things get stuck in development because the next step is taking action in the physical world, moving out of the realm of the idea. And I know sometimes when I've been coaching executives, let's say they're having a challenge with the manager up the line from them, which it presents a greater risk, it feels like, because there's more on the line. And a lot of times that they can think through the process, and we can talk through the steps of what the next meeting's going to be like and how they're going to show up and all these types of things and vision casting for it. But there is that point in time when they actually have to take the meeting.
Yeah, and it's a threshold. And we tend to sit in a comfort zone and not want to cross over a line into the unknown, you could say. We're more comfortable with the known than the unknown. I'm remembering a comment Ray Bradbury made. It was actually in response to a writing student's question at a conference. And the student asked, well, should I make an outline? And this was for fiction work.
Right.
And I've heard the audio recording of this later. Ray Bradbury got quite incensed, and he said, no, I want you to throw yourself off the cliff and build your wings on the way down.
Right.
I'm not advising that, and I'm being clear to say this was relating to fiction.
Right.
I write a lot of nonfiction. I always create an outline. But in that case, he was talking about surrendering to the unknown for inspiration purposes. It's a little different than what you're talking about in a business sense, but there's still an element of that. In our thriving work, we're tapping into both logic and intuition.
Right, and as we're discussing this, I'm flashing back to a challenge I had with a manager up the line for me at one point. It had gotten so bad that I was on probation for insubordination, because how I was dealing with it was clearly not according to that manager's liking, and wasn't really appropriate either. And I got a coach, and we started to walk through this process that I was just describing of helping me look at it from that person's point of view, helping me look at the ripple effect of my behavior and how it was impacting things. And then the challenge was start showing up differently.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I started showing up differently, and I still remember the point after a few weeks when he said to me, the coach said to me, all right, now it's time for you to sit down and have an actual conversation with the manager. And it was like, what?
You want me to do what?
And I mean, I lost sleep the night before.
Yeah, sure.
Because it was me sitting down and saying, listen, I know I've been a challenge.
Yeah.
I know.
So it's confessing in a way, being honest.
Yeah,
and
being
remorseful.
being honest and saying, here's what I've been doing to change. I hope you've noticed. What else can I do to be more effective in working with you?
Well, now let me ask you, because I'm sure some of our listeners have faced this or are facing this. Were you also afraid that you wouldn't be able to stick with the new plan, that you might kind of fall back into your old habits when you met with him?
Yeah, there is that, right? Because then now we have formal accountability, not just me starting to leave a different impression. And that manager kind of confessed to me that was a concern of his, that he had seen the change. He appreciated it, but he wasn't sure it was going to stick.
Well, and that's justifiable because a lot of changes don't stick.
Right.
This is one of our primary challenges with clients, is helping them sustain the gains they're making.
Right, and so part of what he and I did, and I mean, hats off to him, still to this day, I said, what are some things I could do? And he gave me a couple of additional points that I could focus on. And, then he said, what is it I can do?
Oh, well, that says something about his character.
Yeah. So I was hesitant. I lobbed a softball out there first, an easy one, and he went, okay, great, I can do that. Now, what else? Oh,
well, quite a guy.
Yeah. So I gave him one that was a little more challenging, and he said, yeah, I can see that I need to do that. You're right. Oh. And then he said, I want you to hold me accountable.
Well, wonderful. Wonderful. Well, that's about as good as it gets. I wish they were all exchanges
there
like
was
that.
There was a flip side to that, too, and I'm going to hold you accountable.
Yeah. Right. Well, let's just point out that what you did to open that situation was, well, you were honest about yourself, so there was some real truth-telling, and not just in your head. You were speaking the words to the very person who really needed to hear them, kind of facing your greatest fear in that relationship. And then you did something very interesting, very simple, but often overlooked. You asked a question.
Right.
You said,
right.
Tell me if I'm missing something. What do you see? You opened yourself to feedback, and then interestingly, he did exactly the same thing. So the point here is that if we can be vulnerable, if we can get ourselves in a situation where we trust enough to get vulnerable and we're honest, my experience, I'm sure yours is too, most of the time that turns out pretty well.
Yeah, those are good points. I hadn't thought of it quite that way, but you're right. And I think what my coach was encouraging me to do was take an action step, sit down with him and have that meeting. Without having had that meeting, none of that would have happened, right?
Well, you're reminding me of something that a workshop presenter said at a session I was at a few weeks ago. He said his point was helping people access their genius and become supernatural. It was the term he used, which was, very appealing. Who doesn't want to be supernatural? But here's the thing he said. In order to become supernatural, you have to stop doing things that seem natural. Isn't that interesting? In other words, we're doing a lot of things that seem right, but they're just familiar.
Right.
They're familiar actions that we've taken over and over again, sometimes for many years. So to break those habits, initially, we'll find ourselves doing things that don't feel natural. They feel unfamiliar because they are.
Well, and we've talked about this in a variety of places in our book and online course and so on, and that is that when we're making changes, we're actually having to forge new neural pathways or new, neural highways, you could say. And so it takes repeated action to do that, and it's why we talk about having accountability partners, because they help us to keep doing that thing that seems unnatural at first or supernatural.
And it's vital to have that accountability partner, because what is often omitted by kind of inspirational presenters who write books and give talks and encourage people to make change, is that the moment we disrupt our familiar patterns, we get out of our comfort zone, we take action that's different, unfamiliar, chaos shows up.
Right.
Sometimes you listen to these guys and it's like, heaven opens. Your life becomes wonderful. You lose weight, you make more money, your relationship is much better. Well, those are the goals. My experience in coaching people, the experience of my clients, is that when we do start taking actions that are unfamiliar, they're new, they're different, there's a certain amount of uncertainty that shows up. We've rocked our own boat, and it's very helpful to have an accountability partner to assure us this is okay, this is normal, the new normal, we're heading towards a new state, and this is a transition period.
Right, it's not always going to be like it is when we initially disrupt the norm.
Right.
Well, as you're describing that too, I was flashing on, different scenarios that happen with clients, and that is that the change process is something that is a process.
Yes.
And going back to some of the basics in Lean and other systems where it's plan, act, measure. Right? Did it work or did it not work?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, we could get stuck in the planning phase, or we could get so hung up on the measuring phase. But the idea with Lean and other systems like that is you're doing plan, act, measure, plan again,
yes,
based on how it worked or didn't work, then act again, then measure again. So that the recognizing that you've talked about this before, that planes a lot of times on their way to a destination are off course 80% of the time.
Exactly.
Because they keep realigning with the course. They keep course correcting. And the process of working through a challenge, whether it be in a relationship with a person in our life or our business or some other factor, it's the recognition that it's okay to plan, act, measure, and say, oh, didn't quite get it right. Let's tweak this. Let's improve this.
Exactly. And I think part of the measurement is to take action so you have something to measure. Right. Otherwise, it's just a theory. I mean, I'm remembering years ago I was coaching a small group on public speaking, and this one woman was just terrified of even standing up and saying her name, and she wanted to get over this because sometimes she'd need to make a toast at a wedding or whatever, and she wanted to get over her fear of public speaking, and this stopped her from speaking. So she wouldn't speak up in meetings, she wouldn't take action. She sat there and worried, and so I wasn't having any luck at all with her. And so finally I said, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? And she thought for a minute. She said, well, I could faint. I could, be standing trying to say something and I could fall over. I said, okay. And by now there was a sense of safety in this small group. I said, well, if you don't mind, then please stand up. And what I'd like you to do, and don't hurt yourself, is to start talking and then fall over. Pretend that you fainted. And she actually did it. And she's laying on the ground, and we're all kind of laughing a little bit. And she lays there for a moment or two, and then she opens her eyes and she says, well, now I said, well, stand up. She stood up. I said, well, how was that? And she said, well, it wasn't actually that bad. I didn't die. And then we had a really great discussion about facing your fears. And she found that after that, it became easier for her to talk when she needed to, because she'd faced her worst fear, and it wasn't that bad.
Interesting. That's a great story. Well, so if you look at taking action, we've talked about why don't we take action sometimes, and you just listed one. We have some kind of a fear.
Right.
Or the other aspect is we're in our comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And so we don't really necessarily see a strong enough reason to take action to get outside the norm, right? And, crisis is a great motivator.
Exactly.
When
pain, our back's against the wall.
Yeah, pain is a great motivator. In your experience, what is it that allows people to not be, in those cases, or you could say reactive? I'm reacting to a crisis or to pain or to an untenable situation. What is it in your experience that allows people to start to cultivate the ability to become proactive, to actually be moving ahead of the challenge or seeing it coming and taking proactive steps?
Well, it's a wonderful question, and it's a difficult question. It's a difficult problem. what I found is that as long as the eye is on the prize, and, this is one of those conventions in Western thinking, keep your eye on the prize,
Right,
do it perfectly. That's the problem. Because then we start to get afraid that we're going to make a mistake. We're going to fall down, we're going to goof up, we're going to say the wrong thing, etc. So what I found works much better than targeting a result and getting paranoid about it is instead to shift the focus and begin entertaining the idea that there is value in breaking out of comfort zones on its own.
Right.
Forget the result of doing that. This is like becoming heroic. That if I am able to screw up the courage to challenge myself in a comfort zone and act differently, I deserve a pat on the back for that from myself, that I have just initiated a breakthrough. I've been proactive about making a constructive change in my life. So I find that when people get this, that the first benefit is simply doing it, and then there's the result, and we learn, we course correct from what happened. But to shift the focus from the result to the process, as you were saying earlier, and see oneself as heroic. You know what? I did it. I challenged my comfort zone, and I got out of it, and I tried something different. Maybe it turned out terribly. The point is, I acted.
Yeah, that's great. I love that approach. That is, you're saying that too, and I know that I say this, tons of times. But as I was just thinking about that, back on teams I've been on in work situations where we were proactive, where we challenged the status quo, where we grew together as a team, and part of that was because it was a team.
Right.
So when we've got collaborators in our growth process, right, that can be encouraging each other on and challenging each other in a healthy way, and also patting on the back so that it's not just me.
Well, you've brought this up many times in different ways about the power in a team of knowing that others have your back.
Right.
It's so powerful. I'm remembering, I think it was an Outward Bound course I did, when I was in my early 20s, where we did a trust fall. And this is often done even in corporate trainings. Where somebody stands on a chair and, a dozen people stand there and catch this person when they fall. Well, for the person to trust that they can let themselves go, they need to feel pretty sure that they're going to be caught. If there was question about that, they're not going to feel so likely to do it. So in a team, if we know we've got each other's back, that we're going to be considerate and kind and entertain unusual ideas and experiment together, that's really what helps us take the risk of taking actions that may challenge the status quo. As
you talk about the Outward Bound course, I'm reflecting on an experience I had. I was a co-facilitator of a ropes course experience that was a group of people who'd come in from different businesses, and part of it was to really help not only achieve whatever it was you were going to do on the ropes course, but learn the value of what it was like to be on a team where you supported and encouraged each other. And I remember this one particular woman, she was probably getting close to maybe in her mid-50s. She was not really fit. She was, hefty for her height. Just a delightful human being. I mean, immediately everybody just took to her. So for her to climb a 60-foot pole...
I'm picturing this.
Yeah. In summer where it's hot, right? And then work her way up top onto a small circular platform that moved a little bit as you stood on it, and then launch herself off to a trapeze swing.
Oh man.
The possibility of this happening was small, right?
Right.
Nonetheless, she was totally game, because what they were doing was that quest, that climb, was representing something else in her life.
Sure.
Well, as she began to climb, I can still remember this, people stopped from wherever they were on their different ropes course stations, were so magnetized by her determination, and began to offer up encouragement and just like almost as if we could sent energy to her, and she climbed all the way up there and did it.
She did it.
And the exhilaration that went through the entire place when she accomplished that was just like magic. I mean, everybody was totally lit up. And I think that's one of the other awesome things about having a team, the supportive team, is we can not only inspire each other, but be inspired.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then the whole team benefits.
Oh, man.
It wasn't just her.
Yeah, I could talk to anybody who was there.
Yeah.
This was 30 years ago.
They probably remember.
Oh, they would totally remember it and be able to feel that feeling again as if it was just happening.
Well, and what's interesting is I doubt very much if there was anyone in that group who was hoping she wouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's true. Joe, everybody was rooting for her. Yeah. Everybody somehow appreciated her courage and her willingness and her perseverance, but also it was calling up their own.
Well, this is the thing. There's both. There's championing her breakthrough, but also recognizing this is a symbol to inspire me to break through on my own, whatever my area is.
Yeah, it was the people who went through that particular course made some major changes in life, including her. She totally shifted her career, went in a completely different direction.
See, that's amazing. Yeah. One moment like that, supported by her team, changed her life. I'm actually remembering a similar situation where I climbed a tall tree and part of the same program, and it was supposed to come down a zip line. I'd never done that before. And I remember standing up there being terrified to do this. It was pretty high. And I, to this day, can remember standing on that little platform and thinking, okay, I'm not ready yet. Not ready yet. And at a certain point, it occurred to me that I would never be ready. And I thought, if I wait until I feel ready, I'll be here at Christmas. And so I needed to take action before I felt ready. And I think that's part of becoming proactive. We need to challenge our own mindset about readiness. Because if we're relying on a past metric of feeling ready to go, there are some things where we will never be ready.
That's well said. Yeah, I think that whole sense of ready to step in to across a threshold, as you said, into new territory is something where I can remember. I actually went up next after this woman did.
Oh, wow.
And
tough act to follow.
Well, it was, and yet it was almost. I was so inspired by her action that it tremendously helped me to make the leap and to do the climb and everything else. So, you think about, how this applies in our life or how this might apply in business. And part of it is the willingness to take risk. Mm-hmm. Right now, there are ill-informed risks, right, that we might take where we've extended ourselves too far. And as long as, we don't harm ourselves, plan, act, measure comes into place. Whoops, that didn't work. I took too big of a leap or whatever it might be. But I think it is that distinction between planning and action is a willingness to cross a threshold many times.
Well, and speaking of teams, this is where we help each other.
Right.
Because we're never completely on our own. And it's easier to take a risk when, people have our back, when we're not alone. I'm just thinking of a comment Clint Eastwood made in a Dirty Harry movie.
Right.
A man's got to know his limitations.
Right.
I thought that was a very wise comment. And often we're afraid to really assess ourselves because we're living in kind of a delusion. Well, I can do it. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to do it. Like, I will never fly, without an airplane. It's a safe bet to know that just without any equipment, I can jump off a cliff and that's going to not turn out well. That's a limitation of having a human body. I'm not a bird. So that's smart to know that, so that if I'm enjoying the view at the Grand Canyon, I'll keep a foot or two back from the edge.
Well, as you're saying that too, think about, one of our sessions was on asking for help.
Right.
Making an assessment and asking for help. And so, and tapping into resources. I mean, all these things come into play in actually taking action. So if I really do an honest assessment and go, well, I can get part of the way there, but I need help, then the question comes, am I willing to ask for help?
Yeah.
And do I, even if I don't know where the resources are, am I willing to start putting it out there?
This is excellent, Chris, because what you're really articulating is the key to living our values. Values being the things that light us up. So we can stop ourselves from living our values because we feel inadequate on our own to do what would be required of us if we really lived our values. So why not make the values the more important thing than the idea of doing it all on our own?
Right.
So if my values become front and center, I'm going to live my values, then in any given situation, I'm going to assess what help do I need to achieve that. Maybe there's things I can do on my own. But as you're saying, if I'm on a team, I'll look around and see, well, what are the resources? I need to ask for help in order to continue living my values. That becomes the gold standard, not how I look, will I succeed? It's living my values.
And as thinking about that, I was reminded of a, I guess you could call it a speech or a talk someone gave one time called The Invisible Team. And what they were referring to is that a lot of times in work situations or sports, certainly, or maybe our family, we've got an obvious team of people around us. What they were talking about is there's also what they called an invisible team, people who are just outside our peripheral vision, who could really come in and provide assistance if we started to reach out and put out the call for, I need help with this. Because as you said, if I'm committed to, a certain goal or value and living it out, and I don't see a resource immediately around me, what about the invisible team that I haven't yet met? And in a culture like the U.S., where we have fierce independence as one of our, national values.
In John Wayne we trust.
I mean, it almost, really challenges those who grew up in that kind of mentality to go beyond the limitations of rugged independence.
Well, we like to give our listeners a challenge, and we've just got another couple of minutes here. So let's talk about what listeners could do. Listening to this program on taking action, I think it'd be a great exercise to invite our listeners to think of something where they've kind of hesitated to take action, a little bit out of their comfort zone, and to determine to assess what's needed for them to feel safe, to risk getting out of their comfort zone and take some kind of action that upsets their own status quo. What do you think of that idea?
Oh, I like that. We can take that on ourselves as well.
Sure.
And really, like we said, to assess that and tap into your resources, tap into your visible or invisible team, as the case may be, and just see what occurs. We always invite people to email us at thrivinginbusinessandlife@gmail.com and share, how the experience is. So, feel free to do that. But, I was just looking at the map the other day of where listeners are for our podcast,
right.
and noticed we had some new listeners in Japan.
Oh, great. Hello, Japan.
Yeah, and Uganda, and
amazing.
A number of other countries. But it's always thrilling to me to be able to realize that the things that were shared with us, we're now getting a chance to share with other people broadly as well. And so we're grateful for the listeners, but also the people who helped us, understand what we're now conveying because of how they showed up.
Right, and I think all of us have been in situations where we've suddenly seen someone struggle publicly, and I've never been in a situation where I didn't feel an immediate upsurge of support for that person.
Yeah.
They sort of they're getting into tough water, and everybody there wants them to succeed. That's really the truth.
It is. And so, write us at thrivinginbusinessandlife@gmail.com. I'm Christopher Harding.
And I'm Will Wilkinson. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.